Hello, I'm Will the Gamer, and today I'm going to be talking about weather effects and server types. So first things first, I'm going to start off with server types and their different attributes. So the three separate types of servers are going to be survival servers, PvE servers, and PvP servers. Let's start with the simplest of the three, which is PvE servers. PvE servers automatically have player versus player turned off. The only PvP that is going to be done on PvE servers is going to be through duels or flagging yourself against the enemy faction. To combat this stagnancy in player versus player world combat, the PvE environment will be much more hostile. This means that more monsters will be attacking villages and towns, the respawn rate of monster camps and outposts will be much higher, and the level of difficulty of said attacks is also going to be much higher. Since there will be no players burning your towns and villages, monsters are going to have to fill that shoe. PvE players will be constantly struggling against the computer to survive. Now the next one we need to talk about is player versus player servers. PvP servers are under much less threat from monster attacks, but that's made up for by the constant threat of the enemy faction. The faction AI will constantly be attempting to build armies and navies in order to be used to attack the other faction. When they do finish building these forces, they will attack en masse. These attacks will lead to epic siege battles of player towns and cities. Players can also contribute with their own siege vehicles, airships, ships, weapons of mass destruction. Anything can happen in PvP scenarios. For this reason, the PvE elements are toned down quite a bit. This will not affect gear or grinding in any way, shape, or form, as the attacks on player towns and villages is the only thing that really stops. And even then, in slow periods of PvP, many PvE attacks will still occur. The game should be constantly trying to throw challenges towards the faction that you're on. These two server types will make up the majority of the servers available. That being said, the last server type is what's going to encompass the bulk of this video. The last server type is the survival server. Survival servers encompass not only the extreme difficulty of the PvE servers, but also the dangers of player versus player. On top of this, each player in a survival server needs to constantly eat, drink, and sleep. Players will get debuffs if they're thirsty or hungry and can die of both dehydration and starvation. Your character will also receive debuffs for being tired. Survival players will have to log out their characters in beds in order to sleep for the night, essentially, or until you log back on. During sleep, your needs will drop very slowly, however they will drop down to a point where you're both hungry and thirsty, meaning when you log back on, you'll have to eat and drink as if you were having breakfast. Your character, however, cannot die in their sleep and will only drop to a certain point of thirst and hunger before you log back in. Players who do not log off in a bed, however, are at extreme danger of dying of thirst and starvation. Their characters will also not receive rest, so they will get all the non-rested debuffs. This makes player houses and also inns incredibly important to these people. Survival servers will also receive much harsher debuffs when in extreme weather conditions, making it much harder to do things that other people on other servers can do naturally. Thirst and hunger are both greatly affected by weather conditions, such as being in a desert or being in an icy tundra. As I will get into later, you're going to need specific types of clothing for specific types of weather environments. However, this is much more serious for people on survival servers. People on survival servers will need entire sets of gear just to go out into certain areas, whereas people on normal servers might need one or two items. Survival servers are there and designed to be the most immersive experience you can possibly get. You're there to live in that world, quite literally. One might also refer to it as a hardcore server, something that is designed to give you the ultimate challenge. Now with that being said, I want to get into the weather effects now. There are 4 separate extreme weather conditions in my game: vast deserts, far oceans, deep jungles, and extreme cold. Each one of these different environments have different challenges associated with them. However, they all have one thing in common, and that's when you go into one of these areas that is considered one of these extreme weather areas, you cannot use your map at all. Your map goes blank and you can't find your character. This makes finding or locating anything in these giant expanses extremely difficult, and that's the point. Many different boss monsters will spawn in these locations, and players will have to go out in large groups in order to find them. They will need to prepare before leaving for these environments by bringing all the supplies necessary to survive. Also, in some cases, the ability to store whatever you take from that area back to where you want to go. Thus, these expeditions into these dangerous lands are going to be very profitable for people, and it's going to be places where people want to go. So let's start detailing the different dangers of each environment. The first one I want to start with is the deep jungle. Deep jungles will be the most numerous of the environment types, but also the smallest. This means you'll see them a lot more often, but they won't be nearly as big as, say, the far ocean. So what are the dangers of a deep jungle? Well, for one, it's a labyrinth, and you don't have any ability to use your map. A magic compass can guide you, but a wall of trees or a cliffside aren't going to be on your compass. Thus, the biggest danger in the deep jungle is getting lost. The second danger of the deep jungle is extremely violent predators. The jungle is going to be filled with extremely dangerous monsters that will be hard for single players to encounter by themselves. The AI will be purposely designed to hunt down alone or stranded players. This means not only will you be lost in this giant jungle, but you'll have monsters hunting you the entire way. The jungle will also have dangerous plant life that will be trying to poison you, eat you, or just get you the hell away from it. And you might think that's it for the threats in the jungle. Well, besides all the flora and fauna trying to kill you, you're also going to have to worry about the weather. Mud, quicksand, and flash floods are going to be something that are very common within the jungle. The weather effects will differ from jungle to jungle, but you constantly have to be on your feet. You might walk into an area filled with quicksand, sink to the bottom, and be unable to get out. Quicksand will keep sucking you down until it covers your head, at which time your air bar will come up and you'll start quote-unquote drowning. Other players with you can save you from this fate by pulling you out. Always use the buddy system when you're in the deep jungle. Next is mud. Now, mud in itself isn't really all that dangerous. What it does is it just slows your character down. However, there are predators waiting because they know that this will happen. Mud will make your character slow down and occasionally slip and fall. Predators will use this to their advantage and wait to attack you. It can also be used by other players who might not want you there. But the third and probably most dangerous part of the jungle is flash floods. Capable of knocking you off cliffs, maybe knocking you into a monster's nest, or even making you just lose track of where you were, is all the real dangers of flash floods. On top of that, your character could be pulled under and drown. Now, flash flooding isn't going to happen all day, every day at very specific intervals and times. However, that's the danger of it. It comes out of nowhere. And you're never going to know where the flash flood's going to be going through, thus making it hard to navigate through jungles if you keep getting knocked around. So then what are some ways to make traveling through the jungle easier? Well, if you're on survival mode, bringing plenty of food and water is a necessity. Also, bringing a tent so that you can sleep in the jungle would be essential if you're going to spend a long period of time out there. Then for everybody else, using camouflage will stop predators from tracking you. On survival servers, you will need a full suit of camo because if you don't, they'll still be able to track you. Regular servers, however, will only need the main body piece as camouflage. Bringing rope with you will allow you to get yourself out of quicksand without needing another person. This will nullify the danger of falling into quicksand. Jungles will also have canopy outposts scattered throughout the area. They are few and far between, but climbing to the top will allow you to see the jungle and its terrain, as well as use your map. This will allow you to get your bearings so that you can head in the right direction. Alright, so that's all I'm going to talk about with deep jungles. Next, on to the desert. The vast desert is another extremely dangerous biome, but for completely different reasons. The two most prevalent dangers in the desert are heat exhaustion and thirst. If you're out in the desert too long, you'll get a debuff known as heat exhaustion. This debuff will slow down your movement as well as make all of your attacks and defenses weaker. On top of its already inherent effects, it's a stacking debuff, making it worse and worse the longer you have it. To get rid of it, you're going to either need to use a tent, or you're going to have to find some cover. A feat that is not very easy in the dunes of a desert. For survival players, your thirst bar will also rapidly decrease the longer you're in the desert. Survival players will need to bring plenty of water if they want to survive. It must be noted that the reason it's so dangerous not to have a map available to you while you're out in the desert is because it is just so big. It's not the biggest biome in the game, but it is the second biggest biome in the game, and that makes it incredibly dangerous to navigate. Getting lost in the desert, stacking heat exhaustion with thirst rising is not going to be something you want. Which brings me to a very common threat in the desert, sandstorms. Players who travel through the desert often aren't always going to see a sandstorm, however, they're going to want to be prepared when they do. Sandstorms will deal a constant stream of damage to your character as well as slowing them down. On top of that, the player's screen is covered in sand, making them essentially blind. To avoid a sandstorm, you're going to need to find shelter before it arrives, or you're going to have the appropriate gear in order to resist it. Wearing a pair of goggles out in the desert will stop you from being blind. Wearing desert-appropriate gear will also stop the damage from the sandstorm. It will also reduce the chance of gaining heat exhaustion. Regular players will only need their head and chest covered in order to gain the regular effects of the gear. However, again, survival players will need to have their entire bodies covered with the survival gear in order to get the effect. Now, besides the roaming desert dragons, you should be fine in the desert. The next biome I want to talk about is the extreme cold. Hypothermia, snow blindness, frostbite, and starvation are the #1 causes of death in the snow. At least in my game. Like in the other biomes, you're not going to have a map to rely on when you're out in the extreme cold. These areas are generally attributed to extreme ice and snow. Similar to the desert, you'll get a debuff if you stay out in the extreme cold for too long, called hypothermia. Hypothermia works in generally the same way as the desert debuff, making your movement slower and your attacks and defenses weaker. However, instead of it continuously stacking, it gives you random bouts of frostbite. Frostbite is the stacking debuff in the extreme cold, reducing your maximum HP constantly. The only way to negate the hypothermia and frostbite is to stay by a warm fire. The only way to place a tent is to have a fire nearby. This means players on survival servers are going to have to come very well prepared. However, the hypothermia and frostbite debuffs can be disabled if you come wearing appropriate gear. Like in the desert, regular players will only need to wear a head and chest piece. However, survival players will also need a full body. Snow blindness will occur during the day when the light reflects off of the snow. This will only happen in tundra-like areas. It can be countered by bringing sunglasses of some kind of variety. Now, besides all the snow monsters, you should be set for the wilderness. This brings us to our last and the largest biome, the deep ocean. Now, if you're looking to prepare for going out on the ocean, you're going to have to decide first what you want to do. If you're just looking to travel, you're going to need a lot less than people who are going to spend a great deal of time out on the ocean. Ocean activities include fishing, harpooning, netting, diving, ocean battles, and then monster fights. The biggest threat on the water, however, is the water. We're assuming here, if you're going out onto the ocean, that you already have your own boat. Thus, the majority of the danger on the ocean is to your boat. However, in this particular case, your boat is the only thing keeping you alive, so yeah, it's a danger to you too. These dangers include, but are not limited to, heavy storms, water spouts, typhoons, maelstroms, lightning storms, and gigantic sea dragons that are looking to eat your boat. Besides those things, food and water are going to be necessary for survival players. And remember, once you get out to the deep ocean, you're not going to be able to use your map, so finding things is going to be a bit difficult. Unlike the other zones, most of the dangers found out at sea can be avoided by a good captain. Knowing how to steer through heavy storms and steer clear of giant monsters is going to be key for your survival. However, losing your ship is almost a guaranteed death sentence. This is because your stamina does not regenerate while you're in the water. Thus, once you run out of stamina, you're going to start to drown. This means you will always need your boat nearby in order to have a place to rest. However, you can also regain stamina by using a diving bell. This is an attachment for your ship that can be used to breathe underwater. This is very helpful when you're doing diving quests. So besides all the other sea monsters that are going to try and be eating you, that's about it for the deep ocean. And this video is running a little long, so I'm going to end it here. Thanks for watching. I'm Will the Gamer, signing out.